Welcome to GRE Snacks, snackable episodes about the GRE, GMAT, and graduate school admissions. I'm Tyler, the founder of Achievable, and we have built an affordable GRE course that includes everything you need to ace your GRE, which is a full textbook, videos on key topics, tons of GRE questions backed by our spaced repetition algorithm, a built-in study planner and essay grader, and full-length practice exams. You can try it out for free at achievable.me, and if you like it, use the code podcast to get 10% off at checkout. Now, let's get started. Today we have Eva Meza with us, and Eva, I'd love if you could introduce yourself.
Yes. So my name is Eva Meza. I am a fifth year PhD candidate studying social psychology at the University of California, Davis. My research focuses on close relationships with an emphasis on jealousy, infidelity, and cultural factors that shape how people understand and navigate romantic experiences.
Great. Yeah, very cool. And I'd love to just dig in with you today on how you got there, right? Which specifically, for this podcast, which is about graduate school admissions, talking about the application process. Before you were even applying, like, what was it that made you decide that now is the right time, right? That you were ready to apply for a PhD program?
Yeah, so for me, it was really that I missed school. Like, I graduated, I was working a regular 9 to 5 job, and I just felt like I needed more stimulation. And I just really missed learning and going to class and just making something through academia, bringing something novel.
Great. Yeah, and I think then let's go dig into the application process a little bit. First, the key components, like I know that obviously every program is going to have a different application, especially depending on what type of PhD you're pursuing. But I feel like there's still like some overlap with like the key stuff, right? There's, your statement, you're potentially like doing the research match, recommendation letters. And so I wanted to just kind of talk through like those three things, and then specifically, of those three things, what's the one that you feel like is maybe the most overlooked or underestimated?
Yeah, so I would say something that's maybe overlooked or underestimated is that they do look at your application holistically, at least for the school that I'm at. They look at everything, the statements, any service you've done, the research you've been a part of. And I would say like the one thing you can do to really strengthen your application is just gathering more research experience and also like maybe community service work. I think those are really important to the application.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also think, in general, maybe just people don't think that one's going to be that important, but it really is. So I want to talk about just kind of the process of finding your research matched, right? And particularly trying to figure out which program is going to be a good fit for you. Because unlike school, like this is going to also kind of be your job. And the professor that you're working for is going to be your boss, as opposed to, if you don't like a certain professor in a normal undergrad program, like maybe you'll see that guy like twice a year, right? Like, or I mean, like see him in class, but like not really see him outside of that. And then also, of course, there's how does this research like fit with my resume? Like, how is it going to lead to me getting the kind of jobs I want after this? So, how do you kind of approach that process, and what advice do you have for people?
Yeah, so I would say like the biggest thing to know about a PhD is that your advisor can really make or break your experience. And this is the person you are working closely with. So as a prospective student, making sure that your advisor is a good mentorship style for you and it aligns with the way that you work. If you maybe have a lot of things going on, like working remotely, like doing things independently, then maybe an advisor that is more hands off would be a good fit versus if you feel like you maybe need some more hand holding, you want someone to be along with you through these like little milestones as well as the big ones and want someone to check in on you and to keep you on track, then maybe someone who's maybe more hands-on mentorship style may be more beneficial.
Okay. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I also think that in general, when people are applying, one of the biggest things that's consistent across everything is like the statement of purpose, right?
Yeah.
What are the biggest mistakes you've either seen? I don't know if you've like reviewed other people's applications now because you're like older,
Yeah.
but even just talking to people, right? Have you seen like mistakes in the statement of purpose, and what are those mistakes?
Yes, I have. So I would say the first mistake that I see a lot is maybe not making the statement of purpose as personal. And so when advisors and potential like committees are reading these applications, this is their first impression of you. So you really want to make sure you get across like what motivates you internally and why are you here? Why are you applying to this particular program? And what about like this particular research interests you? What personal factors really drove you to be here and apply? The second thing is just not having enough research experience. Some people apply to research programs and they may not get accepted the first time around just because they don't have enough research experience. So I would say gathering as much research experience as possible is really, really important. And you can do this by joining a lab, becoming a lab manager, and presenting at conferences, presenting research. And then the third thing is that you don't get your statement of purpose proofread by multiple people. It's really important to not just ask one person, but maybe ask a friend, a colleague, a peer, a teacher, a faculty, a lot of different people to proofread your essay, and they will maybe give you different feedback, and maybe some feedback is contradictory, but that's okay. Just making sure that you're reading through their feedback and incorporating what feels right to you is important.
Yeah, that sounds good. I mean, I think also like you just touched on something that I actually want to dig deeper on, which is, getting that like research experience before you're applying. Which I mean, maybe it's obvious, but I feel like maybe for some people it's not. Can you talk a little bit more about like, when you should start looking at that? Like, should you be doing it in undergrad? And sort of what are the things that are going to be moving the needle for, oh, I have research experience other than just like I interned in a lab for the summer and, I did the things that I was asked to do.
Yeah, so definitely. I think I went to UC Riverside for my undergraduate, so it was really easy for me to join a research lab. And if you go to a R1 school, which means that they, do a lot of research, they have funding for research, it's really easy to find these opportunities. And how I found my lab is I just looked up neuroscience faculty. I read through every single one and I emailed the ones that I was interested in their research and I asked them if they needed research assistants. So it's actually really easy when you're at those types of schools. If you're maybe at a state school or at a community college, then it's maybe harder to find those research opportunities because they're not as well funded for research. So in that case, I would reach out to faculty at R1 schools or apply to be a lab manager just to get more of that research experience.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, I guess for lack of a better word, impactful research experience, right?
Yes.
Another thing that could actually be helpful with probably is letters of recommendation, which is actually what I want to talk about next, because that's pretty, so the third part of the three things that are consistent in application. And when it comes to letters of recommendation, I guess the first part of this, or maybe you can kind of blend it all together, but it's like the things I want to talk about are who's the best recommenders for you and which ones are going to be most impressive, but also, you should probably pick somebody that actually knows you and not just this like superstar person that you met a couple of times. Then how do you kind of like go through the process of making sure that your recommenders are prepared and then making sure that, the letter comes out good. You won't be able to read it and edit it, but at least getting some sense of that.
Yes, definitely. I think when I was applying to grad school, I asked the advisor that I was working with in the lab, and he wrote me a recommendation letter. And that was really important because he's in neuroscience and he knows a lot of people in psychology at different schools. And also, he saw me work, he saw me go through the scientific process. So he was really able to speak to my research ability and skills. The second person was a faculty member in public speaking. And even though public speaking and psychology are very different, public speaking can be very helpful, especially if you're giving presentations and if you feel like science communication is really important. Public speaking is a very useful tool. And so she wrote my second recommendation letter. And then I had my mentor write my third recommendation letter. And I had a mentor that wasn't an academic mentor, but more so just encouraged me and really motivated me. And he worked at the school, and I feel like he knew me really well. And I tried to
Mhm.
take advantage of these resources. So that also really helped boost my letter, I believe.
Yeah, well, and at the end of the day, the number one strategy for recommendation letters is to have it be someone who genuinely likes you and worked with you a lot, right? But it also has to be kind of important. Is there like a hierarchy? of like the best letters are, assuming all other things are equal, that everybody likes you equally and everybody worked with you an equal amount of time. Is there like a hierarchy on like, letters from professors are the best, and then letters from like a manager is like second best or things like that? Yeah.
I wouldn't say there's necessarily like a hierarchy. I think they can all provide a lot of insight. And so maybe a coach or mentor can provide like a character recommendation, who you are, and that will let the advisor know, like, can I see myself working with this person? This is their character. Is this someone that I can imagine having a long-term 5-year working relationship with? But a faculty member that has seen maybe your growth or your research ability is also really meaningful because they can talk to your skills and abilities and how you've grown over time. So I think they're all very useful. I would say have at least maybe one faculty member that has seen that growth, whether it's academic or research based. I think that can be really important. But I could also imagine like someone that you volunteered with, maybe
Mhm.
like a supervisor at like a clinic, right? That can speak to your growth as a worker. That can be really important too.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, then let's talk about just the application process kind of zoomed out a little bit. And one of the things that, we talked about in our prep was that it's a marathon, not a sprint. So, kind of when should you get started with preparing to apply to PhD programs? And what does the timeline look like? Like, what are the big milestones that you should be shooting for?
Yes. So, yeah, it's important to put this into context. Let's say we're applying for next year, next cycle. The application deadline really varies depending on the school. I think most schools could be November 1st or December 1st. So, putting that into context, I would say you can start beginning this application process even in summer. And so, what I did is I made an Excel sheet with 4 or 5 schools that I was interested in. I noted down when the application was due. I noted down like how much the application fee was and which advisor specifically I was applying to, what their research interest was, and whether I emailed them or not. And so that really helped keep me on track in the application process and making sure I don't, email the same professor twice. So I think staying organized is incredibly important and starting to email these professors maybe late summer to see if they are accepting grad students because you don't want to like waste money on applying to school for a professor and it turns out they're not accepting grad students or they're on sabbatical or they're just not available to at that time. So that's really important to know and I think that that's the first step. And then after that, maybe if you're able to talk to them and get to know them a little bit more or just waiting into the interview should be maybe in like January. And then you should find out if you got in around March, and then you have to accept or deny the application or the offer, I think sometime in April. So it is kind of like a long timeline. But I would say like start preparing early and just making sure you stay organized and you have all the dates down. I think that's really a good tool to keep in mind. Yeah.
Makes a ton of sense. And I think thank you for the overview. And I think, one of the things you mentioned talking about that was like the interview process. And I think before I jump into like questions about the interview, I want to just first think about like the prep, right? And I mean, this prep is going to go into your application and your interview. You mentioned building a spreadsheet, but I think for me, it's like, okay, maybe the spreadsheet takes you a day, right? Like you look up the costs or things like that. Like the more interesting part to me is the qualitative part of the prep. So how do you understand like what the program's values are? How do you understand what the person that you're going to be working with is like, what the, things that are going to help you get accepted, right? Because usually each individual person might only have like one or two slots, right? So you've got to build a very personalized application and you need to tailor what you're doing to that person in that program in that school. So how do you do that research, right? Like how did you kind of approach that problem?
Yes. So what I did was I signed up for a completely free program called Científico Latino. And so they paired me with a mentor from a different university, a faculty member. And so my mentor, Karen, she worked at the University of Wisconsin, and she really helped me stay on track with all these timelines. And as a faculty member, she was really able to give me that like inside scoop as to like what they're looking for exactly and proofreading my essays, making sure my statement of purpose and my research statement were good quality. And that goes back to like making sure your all your essays are being proofread and multiple people are taking a look at it and also spending a lot of time on it. It's important to have have a very good quality statement of purpose and research statement because that is your first impression to the school. And you want to make sure you are giving a good first impression with that.
Great. And the other thing I wanted to kind of ask about, right, is just saying like, once you've done that research, you kind of need to flip it and then position yourself as a really strong candidate for them, right? Or maybe, and you could honestly even take this backwards more and say, what are the things you should be doing to be a competitive candidate? But I think we covered that a little bit, talking about like like the different things that you could be putting on your resume. But yeah, I think just like let's like once you kind of understand what that program wants, how do you position yourself? And also, if you have general advice on how to look like a strong candidate,
Yeah,
yeah, in general, besides like, went to Stanford undergrad or whatever.
yes. So I would say like a couple of things that would make you a competitive candidate is number one, research experience, whether that's being a research assistant in a lab for maybe over a little bit over a year, whether that's having like a summer internship with a lab or being part of like the McNair Scholars, like some type of program and getting into that program like early on can be really helpful. Other non-conventional ways I've seen is like maybe people that do work and get that work experience and then they decide that they do want to do a PhD. And so after having that work experience and going back to school, that just shows that maybe you've built a lot of character and other skills in other ways, and you're serious about this program, especially if you're taking maybe a huge pay cut. So that's another way that you could possibly become a very competitive candidate.
Yeah, great. And then, the last sort of question that I had, and happy to have you kind of add in other things here at the end, but what is, if you want someone to come away with one takeaway from this podcast and just the application process for PhDs in general, what would you want that to be?
I would say start early, and that's with everything, with asking for your letters of recommendation, ask for them early, whether that's like constructing your statements of purpose and a research statement is, brainstorm and start those early and just really prepare yourself and stay organized. I think those are my most important, I guess, strategies that I used and that worked for me, and that's what I recommend for others.
Great. And then anything else that you want to make sure we cover today that we haven't talked about yet?
I think that's it. And one more thing is just if you do want more information about the application process, I do post some resources on my Instagram at the Latinx Success Network on Instagram. So feel free to follow it if you need any more information.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much. This has been GRE Snacks, hosted by Tyler from Achievable with Eva Meza from the Latin X Success Network. And you can get a free trial of Achievable's GRE course to check it out and see if it's right for you by going to achievable.me.